Okay, hi everyone. Thanks so much for joining. My name is Noonoo. I'm the K-12 editor here at EdSurge. And EdSurge is a news and information resource, helping you bring the best in education technology through our news stories, research programs, and community activities, which include live conferences and events such as this webinar. And at the end of last year, EdSurge joined ISTE, the International Society for Technology and Education. And ISTE is a nonprofit organization that serves educators interested in the use of technology in education. So thank you so much again for joining again this week. For today's webinar, we've lined up two really dynamic thought leaders on the impact of coronavirus on K-12 education, but specifically we'll be focusing this week on special education and universal design for learning during today's discussion. A quick note before we begin, this webinar will be recorded and the recording will be made available to you via email after the live event. If you've signed up for the webinar, you'll also receive updates about recurring webinars on this topic, and we plan to host them weekly as we've been doing. We have an archive section, which will also be in the email. You can see the previous two webinars that we've done. You can ask questions at any time throughout the webinar using the Q&A feature in Zoom, and we'll be bringing you your questions into the discussion as we're able. We also encourage you to use the chat, so say hello, where you're from, share some resources, but please do put those Q&A questions for the panel into the Q&A. Another note is that we might run a little short, which is totally fine this week. I might not keep everybody the whole hour. I know we have a lot to get through, but I'm confident we'll be able to do that. But we'll try and get to as many questions as we can. Before we get started, I do want to draw your attention to a new guide from EdSurge and ISTE. It's called Navigating Uncertain Times, How Schools Can Cope with Coronavirus. And it collects all of our stories, our contributors, and some really helpful resources. So I'd encourage everybody to take a look at it. It's online at readiness.edsurge.com. And I also want to draw you to a new site from ISTE and a host of other education groups, and it's called Learning Keeps Going, which also features tons of resources, including an educator help desk to answer questions, and that's online at learningkeepsgoing.org. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the panelists on today's calls. I'm so honored that they could share their time and expertise with us on such short notice. And today we're joined by Sean Arnold, a STEM coach at the New York City Department of Education, and Luis Perez, a technical assistant specialist for the National Center on Accessible Education Materials. So thank you both so much for joining us.
Good afternoon, Stephen.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, everybody. Glad to be here with you all this afternoon.
So I wanted to start, ask you both a question. Basically, what is universal design for learning? Can you give us a 30-second overview of it, Luis?
Absolutely. So universal design for learning begins with the premise that all learners vary, and that the way that we address that variability is by designing a flexible curriculum that has lots of choice, lots of options. We know that learners are vary in how they're engaged, how they take in information, and also how they're able to show what they know. So we want to provide a variety of options in each of those areas in relation to how we hook learners into the learning environment and motivate them to learn, and how we present information in a variety of ways. So it's not always a lecture, but we're using a variety of methods to provide access to the content, and then also in how they're able to express their understanding in a variety of ways. So again, not always in writing, but providing lots of options that are facilitated by the technologies that we have. So it could be a video, it could be a podcast, it could be a presentation. So universal design for learning is all about providing options and choice with the idea that in that way we address the variability and diversity of our learners, and we allow them all to reach their full potential as expert learners.
I'll say that here in my context of being in New York City schools, universal design for learning embedded in teaching just looks like good teaching. I mean, it really is just providing options for your students, personalizing the learning for them, which is good for every student, not just students with disabilities. So yes, incorporating different ways for them to engage in the content, whether it's through a video or through a project-based learning option, different ways for them to demonstrate their mastery of the content. So instead of just writing an essay, which some of my students can't do because they don't have the physical manipulative skills to hold a pencil, or maybe they struggle with language because they have autism or some other cognitive delay, they're telling digital stories. They're expressing themselves through simple 3-act math movies. I think if you're not in education, the connection really is on a real world level where everybody's seen, or especially if you've ever come here to New York City, the curb cuts that we all go to, and we know that they're for people in wheelchairs, and those same curb cuts, a lot of have those little yellow bumps on them. If you don't know what those are for people with visual impairments. So somebody who can't see it doesn't just walk out into traffic. Cool, we recognize that it helps those people, but it also helps here in New York, the guy going, taking his laundry to the laundromat, getting it over there. It also helps the woman with the stroller. Those bumps also help in the winter times so you don't go slipping on the curb. So what it is, it's essentially, yes, these are tools and options and things that are designed maybe for one specific group, like a simple ramp to a door, but it's something that helps everybody out.
Yeah, that's great. Sean, just a quick follow-up. So what is an example of a lesson that might be modified in this kind of way, just for an example?
Sure. It all depends on the student, and it all depends on their capabilities and their initiative. But for students who are nonverbal, we might engage in using a number of picture symbols. There are various softwares that work for that. Boardmaker is well known, but there's so many others available out there as well. And instead of text, it comes to them through picture symbols. Even better, it shouldn't be a paper picture symbol. It can be a digital picture symbol. And then the teacher doesn't have to sit there and repeat themselves and say, look, picture, look, shoe, look, whatever it is. The device can repeat that for them. People are probably familiar with that concept if they've ever seen movies or things about Stephen Hawking, where he has his whole communication system. I have a number of students that's true of who already had IEP mandated devices, which basically means these students were struggling in some particular way, and we assessed them with our assistive technology team, and we saw that they needed help either for communication purposes, simply maybe an iPad with an app like Proloquo to Go or Lamp Words for Life, to help them literally have a voice. Or for some other kids, it's simpler modifications where all those classrooms that are maybe using an interactive display, but this student has a switch at their desk because they can't roll up easily in their wheelchair and whatnot, and so they can access and interact with the display from their desk. So in truth, these digital tools were already heavily in use for the students who most needed them.
And if I may add to a couple of things that Sean said, I'll do a yes and I would say that it is good teaching, but it's good teaching by design. Mm-hmm. And so that's the design piece of universal design for learning. It's really thinking about the curriculum up front so that we're thinking ahead of the barriers that might be in that curriculum and thinking about ways that we can provide options, because every single tool is going to have a barrier in it, just because of the nature of our learners. They vary in a wide range. So any single tool will have a barriers, and that's why we need to provide options. And so we try to be proactive in doing that rather than, we like to say forethought instead of afterthought. And then the other thing that I want to clarify is that universal design is just one aspect of UDL. That's where it originated, as Sean mentioned. So it started with the universal design movement in architecture, but it also goes into the digital realm. So for instance, captions. How many of you turn on the captions because you're watching a movie from, even in your own language, where there's a strong accent? I know I do that. I'm Latin American. And whenever I watch a movie from Spain, if the accent is really strong, I actually turn on the captions. Or if I'm at the gym, which I won't be right now for obvious reasons, but sometimes at the gym is the only way that you can get access to the information. Or at a library where you can't turn on the audio, or on the subway where, it's too loud. So there's, these options are there, as Sean said, there are, digital ramps really In the physical world, we use them as a way to provide access to in a variety of different ways. But in the digital world, they're also available in the way of captions and text-to-speech and speech recognition. Those are all just the equivalent of ramps, but just for the digital world. And so, they help people like me, for instance. So I am visually impaired, and I rely on technology to help me access content and to be able to work. I'm primarily a remote worker, and that's a great advantage for me. You all are actually living the remote life right now. I live that life most of the time, and it's really, really helpful to me because as a person with a visual impairment, navigation is a challenge for me. But guess what? If I don't have to leave my office and I'm here at the computer, this is a safe environment for me.
Well, and I'll say I've known Luis for a while, and digital technologies have enabled him to do things that the general person might not think possible for somebody with a visual impairment. Luis takes beautiful photographs. You can check his Instagram feed for that. And all empowered through technology, letting him know what's there visually available in the image. I will also say we can't rely solely on those tools. So even in terms of the means of captioning, yes, there are ones that do it pretty accurately and they're getting better and better, but we can't trust that alone. There are methods to go back and check and edit it and make sure it's always best for your students. And I think knowing what's best, again, I keep cycling back to the thing of generally what is good teaching, and it always starts with rule number one, which is also rule one of universal design for learning, and universal design is know your user. In this case, for us, that user is our students. And rule one of good teaching is always know your student as well as you can. You can't teach effectively if you can't make it meaningful for them, if you can't make it intrinsically motivating for them, and if you can't make it accessible and made for them through universal design.
Yeah, and I see Liz made a good point in the chat here about checking the accuracy. And that's something that I've seen over the last few days since I'm at home, like a lot of you. I've been watching a lot of webinars and I've noticed that people are turning on these automatic captionings or captioning. But the way that I think about it, imagine that you were watching a movie and every, let's say you had 80% accuracy. That means that out of every 100 words, you're missing 20 words. And what if those 20 words are the key words for understanding, that program, the content of that program? And so that's what I've seen with these automatic captionings is that, yes, they work to a certain extent, but they're not sufficient. So we definitely need to, after the fact, when we share that webinar, that recording, go in and make sure that we actually provide high quality captions that have been edited to identify changes in speakers or just add punctuation, because automatic captioning is the longest run-on sentence in the universe, right? It just keeps going and going and going. So you don't know when things start and stop. So absolutely, there are limitations to these tools, but I always tell people, and I absolutely feel this as a person with a disability, we're lucky to live in the time, and I know this is going to sound strange given everything that's happening, but we're ready for this situation with the technologies that we have. It's not about technology, it's about process. That's what it all comes down to, is developing good processes. And so that's something we can talk a little bit more about, but the technology's there. It's just a matter of developing good communication within your district or your whatever environment you're in, and making sure that you're collaborating and everybody is on the same page. That's what's really important at a time of crisis like this one.
Yeah, I imagine what this would have looked like 20 or 30 years ago when we were younger and in school.
Yeah, it wouldn't have been nearly as possible. I guess school just would have been canceled, period. Or there would have just been a lot more take home work, which is really interesting because things have moved so online. So how do these UDL, Universal Design for Learning principles, translate to the online environment when teachers can't be physically there with their students?
Well, one thing is, we're on a Zoom platform today, and you can create breakout groups in Zoom as well. So that's something that I've tried to do. We try to do in a number of our meetings that we've had. And so that you can start out with, bringing everybody together to sort of set the stage, set the context for what you're going to be learning. And you can still have discussions in smaller groups within those breakout areas. And that's the part of UDL, is providing options so that you're not always in the big room. You know, in the classroom, we would provide flexible seating or flexible arrangements, flexible groupings. Well, we can do that in some of these environments as well. But the other thing that I want to mention too is just as we move to online, it's important to have a balance between synchronous and asynchronous. Because I've seen that a lot of people have just jumped to all synchronous, and that can be a significant challenge to users of assistive technology like switch devices and screen readers. So it's good to have a balance of synchronous and asynchronous so that, you know, people can process information at the pace that works best for them. But also in terms of equity, right? We're balancing not just learning, but also our families, our home environments. In some cases, for some kids, there may not be a home environment. They may be homeless, or they may be transient in terms of where, you know, they don't know where they're going to sleep next. So making sure that we provide those opportunities that learners can tap into when the time is right for them, right? When they're ready, not only physically in terms of being in a safe space, but emotionally. Because one of the things around universal design for learning that we know is that emotion and cognition are not separate. They're part of the same thing. So if you're not in a space where you're ready to learn, like readiness is really important in terms of your emotions, then it doesn't matter how much content we throw at kids. They're not going to be able to process it because they're going to be in a state of stress, a state of alert. So making sure that we address things like mindfulness and making sure that we provide options for timing is really, really important at a difficult time like this, where it seems like things are speeding up. And for some learners, we need to slow down a little bit. So that's my advice on that.
I think Luis brings up several really awesome and important points. I'll go to the first one that he talked about, asynchronous and synchronous stuff. Big words that basically mean hovering over the kid or not.
Yeah,
right?
Sorry, not very UDL of me. Real time.
No. These are terms, obviously, in education world we're familiar with. But so there are so many, I'm not going to say so many. Honestly, I've seen a lot of great things. But there are still some schools that I've noted are trying to keep the same block schedule that they had in the classroom that, in my honest opinion, wasn't that great and effective there, and is far less so at home. Keeping that understanding that maybe those asynchronous tasks will bring a child to where they need to be even better. The fact that it allows them that freedom to fail a little bit, which is what learning is made up of, to dig in and collaborate and communicate and digitally get those like 7 C's of 21st century learning. But it isn't the teacher hovering over their shoulder like they might in the classroom, because they literally are not physically able to. And even more than that, because there are certain students who have other obligations in their home. I know here, he spoke of transient, and I'll get to that one specifically in a moment, but there are students here that are at home, have minimal devices, if any. Let's say there's maybe 2 phones in the house, 5 kids, 2 parents, all sharing it. Maybe they have Wi-Fi, maybe it's that digital divide and it's not high speed, but they're also obligated because the parents still have to go to work and provide in whatever possible way they can. And so that older high school student, in addition to doing their full workload of classes, is now obliged to take care of their brothers and sisters at home and do all those necessary things. We in the city, and I've had former students who lived in shelters, and we did what we could in every scenario, you know, bringing food and snacks to school, bringing, you know, extra clothes and things. I will say here in the city, we've definitely made that a priority and addressing it. I know that in certain places this gets to that big equity piece, and can you be equitable? And obviously they've been trying to address equity in New York City for quite a while. We have a new chancellor that's basically been his key proclamation, and there's been, you know, a fair amount of pushback from certain groups about it. But in this specific case, people who are in poverty, students with disabilities, have particular challenges in this moment because maybe they have no devices. Maybe they are living in a shelter. There's no Wi-Fi in that shelter. The city has gone and found all the money, apparently, I don't know where it came from, but that you've needed, and are buying hundreds of thousands of devices for students where the schools couldn't directly provide it. And they're not just regular iPads, that you take home and connect to Wi-Fi, but they do have service plans on them. So even in a shelter, I saw pictures that he tweeted out of the chancellor himself delivering it into these shelters to kids so they can start that learning process. For us in my district, students who had assistive technology devices, for example, like an iPad for communication, we are remotely able to unlock and add certain things to it, Google Classroom and other stuff like that allows them, even though previously that device was solely obliged to communication, which it usually should be because, hey, I don't want to put tape over a student's mouth to have them participate in the lesson, which is essentially kind of what that is, taking away that communication. But we are allowing for that flexibility now in that space. And then that gets to that other big piece in the midst of this that Luis mentioned in terms of social emotional learning, taking time for mindfulness. The one synchronous thing that I think teachers should do in whatever manner or capacity they can in a given day, week, is find some way, some moment to connect, especially with your elementary students, but all your students, because they're challenged. They see all this craziness going on around them. They don't know what tomorrow holds. Why are things so strange? They just want to know at the end of the day that there are people there to connect. And that's something we actually have experience in. Yes, this whole worldwide phenomenon that this is new to everybody. But here in New York, we had Hurricane Sandy a few years back. Schools got closed, especially some of my friends and administrators in Long Beach. Kids were at home, and we had to connect there. I have educator friends in California who in the midst of the California wildfires had kids still showing up to school. You got a class of 30 kids, 25, 26 of them don't have homes, don't have possessions or anything anymore. And at the end of the day, the only thing that matters is that my friend said to me is that kid needs to go home feeling that they were loved, they were cared for, that they had somebody in their corner. And as much as we need to be regularly doing that for each and every one of our students, as much as we can, the teachers need to be taking that time for themselves too. So administrators need to have that level of flexibility and understanding, knowing that I'm here taking care of my kids and my kids are having things going on, even as I'm in the midst of this, that we need to express caring, even if it's yes through a digital platform and a web chat meeting. If that's not available for a kid, I have schools, we've been helping them put together websites because that's the way they communicated with it, with some embedded asynchronous videos. For some, it's still a phone and they still work and you can still call those kids, and you can still talk to them in whatever their native language is. We can get on the phone with an interpreter. There are digital interpretation tools which aren't as successful, but if that's all you got, make use of it and connect with those multilingual learners and connect with those students and just continue to know that in the midst of every piece of this, if you're connecting with your students emotionally and showing them that you care about them, I think you've succeeded in this world of remote online learning that we're living in right now.
Yeah, that's great. No, that's really good advice. So we touched on this briefly, but the difference between synchronous and asynchronous learning. Can you explain a little bit about, what those terms actually mean, and then also how they can be specifically applied in this context?
Yeah, so as Sean mentioned or started to explain, asynchronous or synchronous, we'll start with that one because that's what we're actually doing right now. So we're communicating in real time. We're using a platform called Zoom. And by the way, Zoom has support for captioning as well, because we do webinars at the AIM Center and we actually hire a captioner who does real-time captioning in the background, and people are able to access that. So a number of these online platforms for synchronous communication support captioning now in a variety of ways. And then asynchronous means that it's offline, so you can access it in your own time. So that can be a website, that can be a blog, that can be a discussion board. That could be one of the oldest forms of digital communications we have, email. So starting an email chain, that could be texting as well. Although texting is a little bit more kind of synchronous, but it kind of combines both because you can check them in your own schedule. So it's kind of providing flexibility in terms of time, which can be a challenge during a time like this. And I do see a question in the chat from Colleen. So if you don't mind, I'll address that one and see what Sean also has to say about it, because this does get at, what can you do at home? And so one of the things that I've been trying to emphasize during this difficult time is to keep it simple. And one of the best places to start is with what you've got. And I'm always surprised, because I've been doing assistive technology training for some time now, how little people know about the wealth of accessibility they already have in their pocket or on their desk. And so all of these devices now, if you go to their settings or preferences or whatever it's called, there's a range of accessibility options that are available to customize how information is displayed. Again, universal design for learning, right? So you want variety in how you present the information, or in how learners, express their understanding, whether it's speech recognition or recording, dictation. So what I'm going to post in the chat when I stop talking here and I let Sean kind of chime in is a link to a page that we have on the National AIM Center website. It's called Personalizing the Reading Experience. And so it's all about those either built-in or very low cost or free supports that are available already on the technology that you have that you can use to provide those supports at home. And I think those are going to become even more crucial during a time like this. So just starting with what you've already got and keeping things simple, I think it's a good approach during this time. This is not the time to redo your entire curriculum or, adopt a completely new initiative, right? There will be time for that, but this time is really, like Sean said, it's about connecting with our kiddos and letting them know that we care and that we're here for them and that we're thinking about them, and that we're thinking creatively about, addressing their needs. I think that's more important, really, than anything in the world.
I will say, yeah, people recognize that we have all these technological tools available to us and suddenly want to jump and learn about 1,700 of them. And even though maybe, I got badges for blah, 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 who cares? It's some of the simple things that still work best. In my district, yes, people have talked about packets and things. I'm not a packet fan in schools or outside of it too much, simply because if I have students who struggle to hold a pencil or who struggle to create text in any context, that packet's not going to do them a whole lot of good. They'd be much better suited for a speech-to-text software if they're capable of speech, or a switch guided access that lets them select in an application like Clicker 7. I saw that some people in the chat were noting about specifics. I don't want to overload people with go get this application and stuff, but I will post because I think there's been more than enough of lists, but I will post if you want another one, I'm going to post something in the chat that has that information. But certain simple things where we packeted together bundles of manipulatives and objects that, were all wiped down very nicely, kept very, very clean. And then we're able to be sent home with students before they left. Also, just utilizing things that exist in the student's home. For example, a simple math lesson where, all right, we've all got so much toilet paper stocked up in our houses at this point now. Go ahead and take 1 or 2 sheets and measure those. Okay, now how are you able to estimate what maybe the length of the entire roll of toilet paper is from that, or what are the best means? And one of the cool things that people don't recognize in math is that they think it's just problems on a piece of paper. That's arithmetic. Math is awesome and so many bigger things. So there's so many ways to solve it. They can use the circumference and you could guide through that. They could use estimation. They could use determining by number of sheets and multiplying it out. We don't need to dive into wholly these chat spaces always, constantly, although there are nice ones for it. Luis mentioned Zoom, and there are benefits to that. Some of the other ones that exist out there are Google Meet. Microsoft Teams has a lot of embedded accessibility features inside of it, including the immersive reader, which gives picture symbols and reads things to students. Some people in the midst of all that, teachers, parents, students, also were concerned about privacy. But it's strange to me that some of the same teachers who were reticent to have administrators in their physical classrooms regularly, they didn't want parents also in there constantly, are very, very eager now to have that live shared space because they gladly want to connect with their students, and rightfully so. Those are some for synchronous stuff. There's other ones like Nearpod and Pear Deck that allow you to, yes, share your presentation with your students live and ask them live for information. But those same platforms also allow for asynchronous, so you can assign these things to a student. They can do it in their own time. A platform like Flipgrid, if we do still want videos, because a lot of the things people are digging into is, hey, what does this look like for a physical educator, especially adaptive physical education? What does this look like for related service providers? And I think we might dig into that later, so I don't want to spend too much time on that right now. But simply an asynchronous platform like that, where I can practice my speech repetitions with students, or demonstrate occupational therapy techniques or adaptive physical education with perhaps some simple objects they may have at home, then they can go ahead and post the videos with, all they got is one little smartphone in their house. Whenever they get time, whenever somebody else isn't using it, they can hop on and do that.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks so much for those resources and those ideas, Sean. Luis, so Sean referenced earlier, these resource lists that, are being passed around. How do you vet those resources and make sure that they're, appropriate for your needs?
That's a great question. So I will say that the first thing is, try as much as possible to work with some of the tools that your district has already vetted for you. So they've looked at, Sean mentioned privacy being one of those concerns. That's something to keep in mind is, is there a privacy policy for that tool? And then of course, accessibility. There are districts that have teams that look at the resources when they're being procured, and to make sure that they're accessible. But I do want to share with you today, I just did a blog post recently on this on my blog. There's 3 things that I look at right away just to kind of get a sense of the accessibility of a tool. So I'm going to share those with you right now. So number 1 is, can I select the text? So can I go in and draw a selection around the text, like if I'm going to copy and paste it? Because if I can't do that, then neither can assistive technology. So whether a learner needs text-to-speech or they're using a screen reader, if that text is locked in any way, or if that text is presented as an image, then it's not accessible to AT, it's not accessible to me being able to select it. The second one is keyboard accessibility, because so many users of assistive technology use the keyboard as the way that they navigate through. And so generally when I'm looking at a website or any kind of online tool, I will just flip my mouse over and then just press the tab key on my keyboard a few times. And I should be able to know as I press the tab key where I am in the interface, where I am in the content in terms of the links and so on. So just making sure that there's really good keyboard accessibility. And then the final one is, if there is some video, I will play the video. And then I won't just play like the first minute. I'll go somewhere in the middle and randomly take a look at the captions, just to make sure that, they follow the, have some grammar in them and are identifying the speakers and so on. So then I know that they're not the automatic captions. So those are just 3 simple rules that you can start to sort of vet tools. Doesn't mean that they're completely accessible, but it's just a first check, right? And then you can narrow down the tools that you're looking at. So you don't have this whole mountain of tools. Now you're picking from a smaller pool of tools that have thought about some accessibility barriers, right? Those basic barriers that can keep somebody from even getting in the door and be able to experience that content and that interface. So that's my advice. Sean, you have any other tips?
Well, I'll say I'm about to share in that some stuff specific to accessibility and tools related to that, so that I just shared in the chat. But I'll say that there are particular tools, add-ons like Clicker, which helps students who are barely verbal, nonverbal. Immersive Reader in Microsoft Teams has some really great stuff for multilingual learners, for students struggling with language, so they have visual prompts entirely. But even more than all of that, you can go beyond the text to embedded systems digital storytelling, and maybe I'll share a link on that in just a moment, where something as simple as an Adobe Spark or Book Creator Online is actually a really nice one to create digital books for your students with embedded picture symbols, books that automatically read to the students themselves if they're not capable of it. But ultimately, I think, since we're talking basics, and I saw that somebody here asked what the basics of the process look like, yes, there's that vetting of technology. And yes, there might be teams here that are vetting it for FERPA and COPPA compliance and HIPAA for our service providers. And I'll mention a little bit more about that later when we get into service providers. But there's some keys just that don't even require technology of how to do this well. Key one, contacting parents, right? Getting in touch with them in whatever method or means is best. What do they have available in the home? What do they need most help with providing for their child's needs in terms of mobility, in terms of communication? Can it be done through a device? Do I need to text the parent? Certain platforms like Remind, or if the parents are used to visiting the school's website, if that's done accessibly, and that's been a huge push in all the content we've been pushing out in New York City in these last few years, but we've had tons of trainings on just basic web accessibility so that schools, now we have scored grades and are all raising the level of their web accessibility platforms on their websites. They're raising the level of accessibility even if they put together a basic Google Doc so that they're using alt text in every image they put inside of it. They're they're setting headings at each level so that somebody with visual impairment can easily get through the document to where they need to be. They're not just hitting return if they want spaces, but are actually adding spaces so that visually impaired person doesn't suddenly hear space, right? So there's some key things like that, but again, step one, reaching out to the parents. Step two, when you get onto whatever platform, synchronous or asynchronous, prioritize seeing the kid. And when I say seen, I put that in air quotes because seen might be a morning phone call, an afternoon phone call for check-in, just like a mental health check-in with the kid. These first times in this situation, you might have taught your methods in your class, and if you call them classroom rules, done that at the beginning of the year, you're gonna have to do that again, right? Here's our rules for our web center. These are the things we've all become accustomed to in this, but starting at the beginning, please everybody keep your microphones muted. Please go ahead and keep your camera off. All these basic rules of these situations that we have to learn. And as Lewis has been saying, definitely make time for the mindfulness and social emotional learning, keeping it simple, as he said. Yes, there are 100 tools and things that are available right now and pushing out, and feel free to continue that learning and finding out whatever is best for your students. That's long been my goal. But for now, with so much changing, try to keep it as simple and for your students as possible, but still allowing for student creation. Don't make this a rote process where it's all just answer this question. Give them that asynchronous time to build and make and do whatever it is in their home. Maybe they got Legos. If you know that that's a tool that your kids have in their house, a lot of them do. It can be simple constructing something, a visualization out of Legos. Maybe they got several food items. Go ahead and show me you demonstrating for early learners your ability to count grapes. But constantly get that feedback. As a separate rule, I would also say now is the perfect time for teaching digital citizenship with your students. If you haven't done so already, though you probably should have been. There are lots of resources for that. Common sense education is a really, really great one. Google has its own sort of on-based learning games for learning about digital citizenship. But in the midst of it all, as that general rule, it always seems to me to go back to know your students well, connect with your students. And part of that is also knowing yourself well and taking time for your own mental well-being and mindfulness.
Yep, you definitely, when you get on a plane, they always tell you when they do the safety announcements, put the mask on first. Because if you don't, you won't be able to help anybody else. So as an educator, take time during the weekend to do the things that kind of help you recharge so that Monday you're ready to go with more energy, the energy that this crisis requires. I just want to mention, I'm posted in the chat, we've been creating some resources around how to create accessible content, because that's really important as well. It doesn't matter how good the tools are that we have, we have to feed them good content. And so I've posted 2 handouts that we just created, one on document accessibility and one on presentation accessibility. And both of those are built around a simple mnemonic. So it will help you. It just focuses on 5 practices, not a lot to overwhelm you. And then we also have an entire section of our website, which you can then, once you master these 5 practices, then that's the next step, and you can do that later on. But for now, we want to keep it simple, so we're focusing on these 5 practices for documents and presentations that you'll be sharing with students and with other teachers and with parents as well.
That's cool. Just want to answer a couple questions that I saw in here. I did share that piece about digital storytelling, and I saw another question specifically related to students with emotional behavioral disturbance, which was pretty much most of early in my career. Now, it's mostly students with autism, but I work with students with a wide range of disabilities, students in wheelchairs, with trach tubes. I mean, honestly, that was one of my concerns very, very early on in the midst of all of this, before New York City schools were closed. They were still open, and we had children who were medically fragile. We have students who are already in hospital settings. We have students who are in home instruction because of their health needs, and students who are in regular classrooms, but students with nurses who are with them all day because of issues, and those schools weren't wholly locked down. These students were deeply, deeply at risk, and we had heard that there might be situations where people were coming in contact, parents, and so we were very, very worried. So at the very least now, this is a far superior situation to that. And even more so in our needs to address students with disabilities. Not everybody's needs are met through this remote learning scenario as well as we would want. So we still have regional learning centers that are opened up, yes, for the children of healthcare workers and other essential personnel, but also for students who are of highest need. And there are teachers in the city who are volunteering different shifts to continue working in those on the front lines. And I think that's amazing and speaks so well of their hearts and their capabilities. But specific to those students with emotional behavioral disturbances, there are online platforms that are geared heavily towards that. And I'm going to use acronyms now, blah, 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 PBIS, SEL, just positive behavioral interventions. Classcraft is actually a really, really nice one. It's a game-based, it gamifies your class. Yes, it's behavioral. It connects your students through quests, which are your lessons. It connects students to an identity space. I mean, I'd had students who were, yes, this was in a physical classroom space, but who had gone through some extensive traumas and were angry, and rightfully so. If I had gone through what they did, I would be very, very upset. And it let them have an opportunity to be somebody else and take on a different persona where their problems didn't exactly follow them. And they had a sense of identity in there. And they started to become leaders in my classroom and some of my best students. Some of them, I had a couple, and this is from District 75, who even went on to some of the city's top achieving high schools with Stuyvesant High School and things like that. So there are things like that for early learners. And again, I don't know how much you want to get into the weeds of like mentioning tools, but Class Dojo has a lot of wonderful things for parent connection, social emotional learning pieces. In truth, the behavioral part that it has, which is fine, is not my favorite part. The social emotional learning and parent connections are my favorite part of that platform.
Yep.
Yeah, that's great. I want to move a little into the special education. I know we've been talking about that. So teachers, we've been talking a lot about what they can do with students. What about paraprofessionals and other support roles that, might not have as much guidance on what to do, Sean? Are there any recommendations?
Yeah, this has been the big question from so many people in the city. So there are teachers who are like, okay, I'm starting to find my way. I never really used computers with my kids before, but I guess I'm kind of figuring out. We're in Google Classroom now and I'm sending them things. Cool. But what's the role of the speech teacher or the occupational therapist or the paraprofessional? We call them paraprofessionals here in New York. Other places it might be called assistant teachers or co-teachers. Just to provide clarity of what I mean when I say para. So there's different ways. I will say these platforms, HIPAA has relaxed their guidelines somewhat. You can go on the Department of Health's website and find that these platforms like Zoom and Microsoft Teams and things have been allowed for teletherapy sessions. You don't have to have the super highest end security platform to be allowed. You are not breaking HIPAA guidelines when you're doing this. That is fine. Not that that means you need video live synchronous conferencing to make your sort of therapy happen. For example, Soundtrap is an audio online recording platform for speech teachers that they can work with their students and have a chat on the side, either vocally or through text, while they're having them record and work on their speech issues. I'll say even my own son has been using an online platform. This isn't something that's sponsored by the city, but it's something online called Great Speech, where he's been doing online speech sessions for the past year or so to improve it. So some of these are things that have long been happening. I had mentioned Flipgrid before for some of the occupational and physical therapists and gym teachers. So physical actions that kids are recording on their own time, responding to prompts or videos from staff, or even just separately, there's the conversation of, is this person a co-teacher in your Google Classroom? Is that the role of the paraprofessional there? Well, it depends on the para. I'll say there have been success stories where the paraprofessional is far more technologically savvy than the classroom teacher. And so they're managing the platforms while the teacher is managing content and information that they want to get out to the kids. We've had situations where the paraprofessional, all they have for a device at home is a phone, and not a great smartphone at that. They're calling, making sure they're doing language, especially if they speak the home language of the student, calls home to them, getting them connected, giving them all the information they need so that they can connect to the content the teacher is sharing. A lot of it, in some ways, is really interesting in what we should have been seeing in classrooms in a physical space for a while, because we were seeing a lot more collaboration, rather than people getting pulled out for sessions, rather than people getting pulled into separate spaces. We're existing together, working together collaboratively in this digital space. And I hope that, when we go back to the physical space, a lot of that can continue.
Yeah, and if I may add that to Sean, I work at CAS, where we have a number of centers, and one of them is called CITES. It's the Center for Inclusive Technology Ecosystems. I'm probably going to get that wrong because it's not my project that I'm on full time. But this is a project that's looking at how do we communicate better between these different silos of information that we've had for a long time, IT, AT, and just general education, right? So information systems, instructional technology, all these different departments. And so I'm hoping that one of the things that emerges out of this crisis is, like you said, that we develop better systems for communication. And so we're actually hosting a series of webinars coming up on the 4 C's. So communication, collaboration, coordination, and continuity is what we're focusing on those webinars. So it's around developing strong processes for going forward, because like you mentioned a little earlier, it's not, this is not going to be the end of crisis situations, right? There's going to be hurricanes, there's going to be wildfires, there's going to be other disruptions. So the more that we can develop robust systems, the better off we will be in terms of our preparation for the future. The other thing I was going to say is, in terms of paraprofessionals, I'm actually living this right now because my girlfriend is a sign language interpreter, and their schools have been, they kind of caught a break because they were on spring break at the time of the crisis became more severe, but they're supposed to go back to school on Monday. So they've been having a number of meetings this week to try to figure out how to do the remote interpreting. The challenge in some cases is bandwidth, which I actually found out earlier this week when we were trying to do a webinar with an interpreter. If the bandwidth is not appropriate, then the person's hands are going to look like they're moving in slow motion. So it's like you're talking in slow motion. It's not a great experience. So it's, again, some of these things, I wish we had answers for you, but we don't, because we're trying to figure them out on the spot. And so I think just being flexible and sort of forgiving of yourself that you're not always going to get it right, because we're kind of trying to figure out how to steer the plane as we're flying it. I'm getting my metaphors mixed all the time.
Yeah, oh no, I've heard that one at least 15 times in the last week. We're building the planes, we're flying. Yeah. And to that point, for example, in New York City, we didn't have a, say, Google domain citywide or anything like that. And suddenly we had the largest Google domain in the world for like 1.2 million people. And that came about in like 2 days. But I don't want to put it out because everybody's familiar with that kind of stuff. Those are the tools that exist. But specifically for people with disabilities, they're ones that automatically, those learning systems that have those visualizations built in. Otis is one, OTUS is how it's spelled. Seesaw is another one. Buncee actually has a lot of beautiful visualization tools. But communication, that was what Luis was talking about, is key throughout all of it, in whatever manner or method of communication it is. So we have students recording asynchronous videos, Flipgrid or something like that, that actually are holding up their devices and communicating with that with their picture symbols just by pointing out each thing as they go. Though for larger group things, for kids who are capable, things like Parlay, P-A-R-L-A-Y, is really nice for large group discussions. But in the end, yeah, communication is going to be key, and being flexible and being able to be open to new possibilities and new situations, and not getting locked down to any one thing. Honestly, I just think it's all really hopeful right now for a lot of reasons.
Yeah,
absolutely. It's disruption can be negative, but it can also be positive if it shakes us out of, a rut or systems that are not working or haven't worked. And it opens us up to trying new things. So that's the way that I'm approaching this, that it's a disruption in a positive way, and an opportunity for us to rethink our systems. And so I've posted a link to sites, and if my coworkers see the recording, I'll they'll forgive me because I actually got it right. So I got the acronym right, so I feel better now. So anyway, check that out. Again, we'll be doing some webinars over the next few weeks. We really don't want to overwhelm people. That's been our approach. So we're rolling things out over the next month or so rather than giving it to you all at once, because we feel like you have enough on your plate right now, just trying to stay alive and healthy and, keep your kids in a good place. And then the other thing that I want to mention before we let go here, let's remember that there are parents with disabilities too. So don't just think about the kiddos. There are parents with disabilities who need support. There are parents who speak another language, and they've been lost in this whole shuffle, right? In terms of communication and so on. So let's keep that in mind, that this is, it's a full community. It's not just the kids, but we need to support other teachers. We need to support the parents. In some ways, we need to think about systems. This has been a long time coming. Thinking about systems is really important, more important than ever in education.
Yeah. Go ahead. I was simply going to say, the one really great point I think Luis made is, there's tons of lists and there's tons of great resources out there. But one thing that I think we've been very successful at doing here, and we recognized early on, and I've been a major force in making happen here in the city, is we've been doing a lot of online web trainings. Some of them are just Q&A sessions for teachers to pop into, and teachers from all over the city are getting their questions answered. They're getting guidance. They're getting help about, what does this look like for your students individually? What does this look like in your classroom? And just sessions sometimes to just share their personal struggles and feelings and challenges. I actually, this was a fun one. I was doing one on Minecraft education for teachers just the other day, and engaging in game-based learning heavily, because you can do that through remote learning systems that are built into the game. And all the teachers brought their own kids that were at home with them to participate in the session to help learn with them, because they were all excited to just play and learn and have fun. And so it was a phenomenon where, yes, the teachers were engaging in it, their own children at home were, and then they're going to go share it with their students too, and keep them all the more engaged. So I'm not a person who's generally given over to optimism, but I'm actually in the midst of all this feeling hopeful.
And you know what? It's okay if your cat shows up in the middle of your webinar, or your video, or your dog, or your kids. That's fine, because what's important at this time is to be authentic.
They're your coworkers now, all right? Yeah. And you're enjoying your time there.
We don't need like super produced things. We need things that are helpful and that are authentic and that make a connection. So that's my take on the content that I'm creating, is I'm trying to keep it as high quality as I can, but also be forgiving of myself. That authenticity and that connection is more important than ever.
Definitely.
Yeah. Last kind of question, last kind of point before we wrap up. How much weight to structure and routine for students should teachers be assigning? Should this be something heavily on their minds, providing a lot of structure and routine, or what should they be thinking about?
I would say, go ahead. I'll let you go first, Sean. I just spoke.
I will say, let up a little bit, definitely. to the degree that whatever you think is the normal amount, cut that in half, and then maybe cut that in half again. And also open up your mind as to timetables for when something might be due. If you think, hey, he could probably get it done by tomorrow, give him a couple days, and maybe it'll look even better, and you can assign multiple things over that time. Give time for students to explore and create. If it's just a meaningless sort of worksheet thing, reevaluate and see what the actual use of it is. Yes, there's awesome value in students continuing to read. Yes, there's awesome value in students continuing to work on math skills, but maybe find ways that they can explore it in their real world, things that we probably should have been doing before. And to that point of all these things we probably should have been doing before, and I guess this goes to my hope, so many of these structures and systems that you're talking about, yes, structures are important. It does provide that stability. We want to have as much stability at this point for students as we can provide in this context. But some of the structures that have been in place have been obstacles of equity for people in poverty, have been obstacles of equity for people with disabilities. That's been something that we've tried to address in New York City for a while. But of course, obviously, there will always be pushback because there are people who are in comfortable situations and they don't want this change. And the only time when that does not hold true is in a crisis like this. And in that crisis, there's suddenly the opportunity for rapid and meaningful change. And that can exist, yes, within our political structure, within our societal structures, and in our educational structures that are so often very slow to move and change. This could be, if I hope so, educational leaders will wrap their arms around it, a major and meaningful opportunity to keep those structures in place for students that need it and make them work, but change those that haven't been working for so long, and it's now clear that they haven't because so many things are laid bare of people who weren't stepping up to it, now have to. So many things are laid bare about things that weren't working, structures in place that weren't, and now can be changed and altered for the better. So use this opportunity, and if your leaders are not doing that in your community, in your situation, push them to be that kind of a leader. And if not, I guess push them somewhere else.
There'll be an opportunity later this year.
So, and not just politically either. This is on all scales: society, education, healthcare, everything.
Yeah, and I would say, focus on what are the essential understandings. So 5 years from now, what will we want kids to take away from this situation? This is a learning opportunity as well. So give kids opportunities to learn through everything that's happening right now. And journaling is a great way to do that. And journaling doesn't have to be the typical journal that we think about, that you sit down and you write it down somewhere. Journaling could be, at the end of the day, a 5-second clip on your favorite recording app, your video, because that's something that later on, next year or 2 years from now, we can look back on and we can use as content for learning. So this is itself, the crisis itself. And there are lots of videos out there that do a great job of explaining it in ways that different developmental levels can understand. This is a learning opportunity as well. But I keep coming back to, what is the goal? So with Universal Design for Learning, we started with UDL. We're going to end with UDL. With UDL, it's always about the goal. So what is the goal? And so I want to leave you with a phrase that David Rose, who's the founder of the Universal Design for Learning movement, shared with me a while back. Tight on goals, loose on means. So be clear on what the goal is, what the direction is that you're heading in, but be flexible on the means. And that's something that we've been preaching for a long time. And guess what? Now we all have to be somewhat flexible on the means. But just think about, what is the goal for this week? And make sure that that expectation is communicated clearly. And then at the end of the week, provide a summary, so that kids can self-assess, because what we're trying to do is build their learning skills over time. So that's part of UDL as well, is transferring the responsibility over time to kids. So I would say, start the week with an essential question, and then end the week with a summary of 2 or 3 key points that we want to take away going forward, and keep it simple. So again, we're creating some structure, but we're also allowing for those spaces where creativity can happen. Where different types of learning about life can happen as well. Learning about finances would be pretty useful, like learning about the stock market right now. Probably a good thing to learn about, and balancing a checkbook. So absolutely, there's lots of different learning that can happen in this opportunity. So it looks like we're almost out of time. But again, Sean and I forgot to mention to people, Sean and I were roommates one time, and we've been friends for like the last 10 years since. So we're both very available on social media. We're available through our blogs, respective blogs. Sean is more active than I am on his blog, but it's an excellent blog.
Because I don't sleep.
Yeah, that's right. I love to sleep and eat. So I love the examples you were giving earlier, and that the ones that involve food. I love to count donuts, because once I count them, they can disappear. So
we've done baking sessions at home with kids too. Ones who can't get by the stove, parents help, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, why not? So many of those home ec things are of great value at the moment.
And then you can eat them. So that's my favorite kind of activity. All right. Well, I think that's it, right, Stephen? That's all the time we have.
Yes. Thank you so much, Sean. Thank you so much, Luis. Once again, for lending your time and your insights. Again, I'm Stephen Noonoo, K-12 editor here at EdSurge. We provide the latest resources and news about how technology is shaping the ways we learn and teach. And you can sign up for our free newsletters or find out more resources at edsurge.com. The webinar recording will be coming you in an email next week. I shared the link to the SoundCloud in the chat. If you want to check that out later, it should be up by tomorrow for the recording of this. And to check out more of our webinars, please visit edsurge.com/e/webinars. Thank you so much, and have a great afternoon, everyone. Really, really appreciate it.
Be safe, everybody. Take care.
Good to see you guys.
Good to see you, Sean. Thanks, Stephen.
Bye.